In recent years, astonishing technological developments have pushed humanity toward far-reaching morphological transformations that promise to redefine what it means to be human. Among these is a growing intellectual and cultural movement known as transhumanism. The transhumanists plan to use genetics, robotics, artificial intelligence, and nanotechnology as their tools for reshaping and radically redesigning our minds, our memories, our physiology, and even our offspring.
When I first heard the word transhumanism, like a lot of people, I was a little overwhelmed. Was this science even possible? Or was it just science fiction? It was immediately clear that if this technology were, in fact, real, these developments might lend themselves as an aid to humanity in the ceaseless battle for health and long life. But on the other hand, something in my gut sensed that there could be another side to all of this. When something appears too good to be true, it often is. So questions formed in my mind. What were the moral implications of becoming something other than Homo sapiens sapien, humans, what we are today? Would we be human at all if the agenda of these scientists were met?
Torotopsis dawni, a small jellyfish found throughout the Mediterranean, has the ability to do something that would seem impossible, and has been the talk for thousands of years: immortality. The Torotopsis dawni does this by reverting back to an earlier stage of their life cycle if they become damaged. And they are able to do this over and over again, theoretically meaning they have a never-ending life, and you or your family may be joining them in a life of endlessness. Welcome to the world of transhumanism.
Stem cells are unique cells in our bodies. A human body is composed of about 250 different cell types, and all these cell types are coming initially and derived from these unique stem cells.
What you sow does not come to life unless it dies. When you sow, you do not plant the body that will be, but just a seed, perhaps of wheat or of something else. But God gives it a body as He has determined, and to each kind of seed He gives its own body. All flesh is not the same. Human beings have one kind of flesh, animals have another.
There is a need for organ and tissues, and right now the demand is about 4 times the supply. And for many years, we scientists all over the world, we have tried to generate cells in the laboratory.
You know, Jesus gave 4 disciples a confidential briefing on His second coming. And the 4 disciples came to Him to inquire His return, and He detailed the precedent events that would occur prior to His second coming. And His answer to them, these 4 guys, is so important it's recorded in 3 of the 4 Gospels: Matthew 24 and 25, Mark 13, and Luke 21 and 22. But He opens and closes that briefing with a repeated admonition: take heed that no man deceive you.
We started this project using 2 very closely related species, rat and mice. So we use a stem cell derived from the rat and we inject them into the mouse embryos.
We could see that rat cells, stem cells from the rat, could be introduced into a mouse. And there they are educated to become organs that are composed mainly of rat cells. This is the first proof of principle that we could recreate that environment that allows cells to grow into another animal, inside another animal. And with those first results is when we attempted to replicate them, but in this case using human cells into a larger animal, the cow or the pig. What we're doing is putting these human stem cells in a natural environment, inside a living animal. In this natural environment, they can grow They can differentiate. In simple words, they can be educated to become a heart, a liver, or a pancreas cell type. And this is something very exciting because for the first time, we can see how human cells can grow inside an animal. The implication of these results are vast.
God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind, on the earth." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good.
That occurs in Matthew 24:4, and you'll find it's the theme of the entire presentation. We're dealing here in spiritual matters, and the attempt of the enemy will be to deceive us. But in the middle of this briefing, about verse 37 of Matthew 24, Jesus makes a very strange remark. He says, "But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be."
Only about the size of a cufflink, the device itself is small, but what it could represent is enormous. In this laboratory at the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center, researchers demonstrate the concept. Simply place this chip on an injured part of the body and apply a small electrical current.
This process only takes less than a second and is not invasive, and then you're off. The chip does not stay with you, and the reprogramming of the cell starts. Technology is not just limited to be used on the skin. It can be used on other tissues within the body or outside the body, so on and so forth. So skin is only one example.
That reprogramming turns skin cells into nearly any type of cell doctors might need to treat a patient. A breakthrough technology in regenerative medicine.
Now, in the context there, what he may have been alluding to is simply that it'll be business as usual until, just as it was business as usual until Noah and the ark, it'll be business as usual until he returns. And most people who read that passage assume that that's all he meant. It's just that it's going to come as a surprise. And yet, there are many scholars from the context of the details of that passage feel he was giving us a hint of something deeper.
Humans have been drinking it for millennia. Wholesome, healthy, full cream milk. But this dairy in Beijing isn't quite what it seems. These cows have all been genetically modified, and this is human breast milk.
But sculpting a scaffold out of the right material is only a start. To turn one into a living body part, an ear, for example, it must then be seeded with cells. A few weeks in an incubator allows those cells to multiply, covering the scaffold. Then comes a rather strange test.
This is really creepy. I mean, mice are creepy enough, and this one has no hair and a human ear growing on its back.
Yes.
And we really won't understand what he's talking about unless we understand what the days of Noah were like. And so we're going to try to figure out what did Jesus really mean? As the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be.
Cybernetics. Easily the most interesting of all is cybernetics, a technique that we are already seeing an increase in. Take Stan Larkin from Michigan as an example, who lived over 18 months with a prosthetic heart that he carried around in a backpack. These things a few decades ago would only be seen in movies. Now it's become a reality, and a fast-growing one. Those in favour of taking things a step further say that cybernetics has endless possibilities, and will get to a stage where people needing organ transplants will not have to wait for a donor, but instead will be fitted with a robotic one. Blood transfusions will be performed with artificial blood, and prosthetic limbs will have the same seamless functions as the real thing. Once we've gotten to a competent stage of replacing failing organs and limbs, transhumanists want to see the same techniques being used to enhance as opposed to treat. Legs that never get tired, and eyes that can see in the dark. Who's to say in 100 years, people will be signing up to have parts of their body that are perfectly fine, replaced with technology that would be far better than biology, and this could apply to the brain. Imagine that advances in technology enable us to wake up in the morning and choose how our minds will perform, by selecting a cognitive enhancing drug or by programming our cyberbrain. In essence, everything that fails in our bodies could potentially be fixed or replaced, and if nothing needs fixing, then it can be made 10 times better. To transhumanists, these small steps that are currently being taken are the way forward in creating an everlasting race.
And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them.
Transferring human memories, thoughts, and emotions that are tangible actions that take place in the brain can and most likely will be fully transferable from their biological state to a computer eventually.
Transhumanism is a utopian and a neo-eugenic social movement that presumes that it will be able to create a post-human species for the betterment of humankind. I think there are 4 primary elements to the movement. Number 1 might be called radical self-design. That is, turning myself, if I want to, into a purple and plaid entity with wings. The second would be immortality, the idea that somehow we could recreate our biology so that we can live hundreds of years, if not become immortal. The third is a procreative redesign, that is, presuming the right to create our progeny to suit our needs in the future, what we think would be a better human being, either for them perhaps, but also mainly for us. For example, the person who's a frustrated musician trying to redesign his embryo so that when the child grows up, they can be Beethoven. And I think the fourth is kind of a neo-deity project, the idea that we can become gods and we can endow life with certain attributes that we think are better. There's a certain hubris to the entire movement. There's certainly utopianism, which is always dangerous, and there's eugenics because it denies the idea of human exceptionalism and the unique importance of human life.
Wanting to live forever on this planet, you could say, is stopping us from going to the next stage, which, beliefs aside, is still the biggest mystery of all. What happens after we die? Now, I'm not saying it is, but why live forever if death serves a purpose that we do not and never will understand?
In verse 9, it introduces Noah. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Verse 9, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his teteladoth, his generations, his genealogy. And Noah walked with God. What verse 9 suggests is that one of the several attributes of Noah was that his genealogy was not corrupted by the events of the earlier half a dozen verses. So one of the reasons God chose to bring the flood was to erase the satanic plot to corrupt the line of man. God had a plan for the redemption of man. He had that in mind long before Adam sinned. God was not surprised that Adam blew it, but God had already conceived the plan of redemption. And God's plan of redemption required a kinsman redeemer. And part of Satan's plot to prevent the redemption of man was to corrupt the seed of man so there could not be a kinsman redeemer. But God interfered. That's one reason perhaps out of perhaps over 1 billion people on the earth, only 8 were saved in the ark.